All right, welcome in everyone. Episode 4 of the new College Hoop News podcast. I'm your host, Tony Patelis. Tonight is the Pac-12 preview. We'll be breaking down each team, letting you know our thoughts on the league, and we'll give you our picks at the end of this podcast. So should be a fun night. Tonight I have a special guest with me, Connor Hope from Busting Brackets. Connor covers all things college basketball, but definitely focuses in on West Coast hoops, Pac-12, WCC, Big West. Does a really good job. You can catch him on Twitter at CondorianFM. Also check out his YouTube channel. That's CondorianFM, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, Connor, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing well, Tony. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about the Pac-12. Should be an exciting year. We got some really good teams at the top. So, looking at last season, for the most part, pretty top-heavy league. 4 NCAA bids. Good news is, those teams did really, really well in the tournament. UCLA, Arizona advanced to the Sweet 16, Oregon all the way to the Final Four. Things look to be somewhat the same this year. It possibly could be a little bit deeper depth-wise. I think teams like Stanford and Oregon State could possibly creep up into that NCAA conversation. I know that's an if right now. The good news is, though, teams like USC and Arizona look like elite, top 10 programs, look like they could maybe, fight for a national title possibly. How do you see the league as a whole this season compared to last year?
I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think that the top of the league is still really strong. Obviously, the coaches poll came out today, and I think that pretty much everyone kind of seems to be underrating the Pac-12, the top of the Pac-12. Arizona came in as the 5th team in the coaches poll, which was surprisingly low to me. USC came in at 11th, I believe, which again was pretty low. But yeah, the top's going to be pretty exciting to watch. I definitely think that the middle of the Pac-12 is going to be a lot more competitive than it was last year at, that 5 through kind of 9 spots, 5 through 10. But the bottom, the bottom 2 to 3 teams are probably going to be just as bad as they were last year in terms of, wins. So, but I think definitely that middle of the Pac-12 is going to be really exciting, a lot more exciting to watch this year than it was last year.
For sure. And before we get into our team breakdowns, I just wanted to ask you, I was shocked as well about Arizona at number 5. I figured you wouldn't see them any lower than 3. What do you think that was? Do you think that was maybe a shot at Sean Miller with everything that's going on, or why do you think they were so low?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, looking at their team, they have the 3rd best recruiting class in the country coming in. They return Raleigh Alkins, Alonzo Trier, Parker Jackson Cartwright, and Dusan Ristic, who are really good players last year. So, I mean, I couldn't tell you why they were dropped to 5th, but it's up to them to prove people wrong. So I think this team right now, for me, once Alkins comes back, is probably the best team in the country. So, I couldn't really explain why they dropped to 5th.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think I have them number 1 in my poll. I think from top to bottom, they have the best roster in the nation. Obviously, if Alkins is healthy. USC comes in at number 11. I also thought that was a little low. I think they should be in that 7 to 9 range, possibly. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I have them a little bit high. I have them 6th in mine. But yeah, that 6 to 9 range seems to be right where USC should be. I think part of their issue was that their recruiting class was good, but it wasn't outstanding. So they returned everyone they had from last year, which was a good team. Kind of one of those, they were tied for 5th in the Pac-12, snuck in the first 4. But other than Charles O'Bannon and Derek Thornton, they've got some good recruits, but I think that's probably what it was. I think it was that their recruiting class wasn't stellar compared to some of the other teams in that top 10.
Right. And before we get into the team breakdowns, UCLA came in, I think, at 18. That's pretty much where I've seen them in most polls. I've seen them anywhere from 16 to 20. I thought that was a pretty good spot for them. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that 16 to 20, 18 is a really good spot for them right now. I didn't have any issues with UCLA at 18, but it didn't confuse me.
Okay. All right. So let's start with the team breakdowns tonight. We're going to go through each team. We'll give our thoughts on where these teams will finish and how well they'll do this year. Talk about key players, and we'll break down a lot of stuff. So we start with Arizona. Pac-12 champs last year with Oregon, co-champs. Won 32 games, 16-2 in conference. Made it to the Sweet 16. A little bit disappointing losing to Xavier. That was a pretty big surprise. I have this team at number 1 in the Pac-12. Probably not a surprise to you heading into the season. Obviously there's some question marks, obviously, surrounding the program right now with the FBI scandal. So, kind of putting that aside and looking at this group, to me, this is the best team in the country, as I said earlier. Now, obviously, Raleigh Alkins needs to be healthy, but from top to bottom, I really like this group. You have key returners, Alonzo Trier, Dusan Ristic. You mentioned Parker Jackson Cartwright. Then you bring in a transcendent talent like DeAndre Ayton. Brandon Rudolph's a really talented kid as well. What's your thoughts on Arizona this year?
I really like this Arizona team. I think Sean Miller has put together a team that, talent-wise could be better than it was last year. Obviously, they lose Kadeem Allen, who was an experienced player that was key to Arizona's, Sweet 16 run last year. They lose some pretty solid players in Lauri Markkanen and Kobe Simmons. But, that they have the 3rd best recruiting class in the country, as I said. They bring in, 5 top 100 recruits. DeAndre Ayton obviously is, seen as one of the top 3 to 5 recruits in the country. The key for them really is going to be, getting everyone solid minutes, making sure that they, spread the ball around. And, losing Raleigh Alkins, I was looking at it today. He was out end of September. It was 8 to 12 weeks. Best case scenario, they're missing him for, the only big game that they have him out for is CSU Bakersfield, which really isn't that big a game, but they're, towards the top of their conference. But worst case scenario, he could be out for the battle for Atlantis, Long Beach State, Texas A&M, Alabama, and even UConn. I mean, those are all in that 8 to 12 week range. So hopefully he comes back sooner, but they definitely have the talent to fill that spot. Brandon Randolph, if they want to go 3 guards, Emmanuel Akot, if they want, a true small forward in that spot, can probably are, both talented enough to step in while Alkins is gone.
Okay, a couple things I wanted to key in on and ask you your opinion on. Talk about DeAndre Ayton, first of all. 7-foot kid, versatile, can step out on the perimeter, really good rim protection skills. What type of impact, how big of an impact do you think this kid can make at the college level?
I think right now DeAndre Ayton is probably, he's definitely the best freshman in the Pac-12. I'd probably put him in that top 5, probably 5 to 7, players immediately in the Pac-12. I mean, he seems to be that good, and I've heard really good things about him. Whether he's playing the power forward with Ristic at the center or vice versa, he can fit into both of those roles pretty well. He's not going to be, the Lauri Markkanen, step out and be that stretch forward for Arizona, but he's definitely going to be one of those interior defenders, big 7-footer that's going to be tough for anyone to handle in the Pac-12 and in the nation.
Okay, and we've talked about this a little bit before. Dusan Ristic, I think he's a really undervalued guy on this roster. I think he's going to have a big year. Do you see him playing significant minutes again this season with Ayton in the fold?
Yeah, I do, and I think that he's one of those players. He doesn't have to play a lot of minutes to make an impact. Last year he played less than 23 minutes a game, still averaged 11 and 5.5 rebounds, I think, in the 23 minutes, which was really good, and it's what they needed. And he can finish. He has a soft touch around the basket. He's another big guy for Arizona. People seem to be down on him because he wasn't one of those centers that was getting 8 or 9 rebounds a game, but he also wasn't playing 30 minutes a game. He was only playing 23 minutes a game. So, you put him in there, he's going to give you production while he's in there.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I'm really high on Ristic. I think he has a pretty significant year for Arizona. The one question I had is, don't get me wrong. I like Parker Jackson Cartwright as a player, but he's never really played a significant role yet in his career. Do you think point guard play could possibly be an issue for this team?
Yeah, if there's any position I have am worried about, it's going to be that point guard position. Parker Jackson Cartwright I think is going to be really good. He's got a good assist to turnover ratio. He can shoot the 3 ball relatively well, 42% from 3. But behind him, they have Alex Barcello, who's a 4-star freshman from the Phoenix area. And if they need to, they can go to Dylan Smith, who was a UNC Asheville transfer. But really, like if Parker Jackson Cartwright doesn't step up, you might be seeing a lot of Alonzo Trier handling the ball, which doesn't necessarily make me that confident. But I have confidence in Parker Jackson Cartwright.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention Dylan Smith real quick. With this recruiting class being so deep and so talented, a lot of people aren't talking about him. It's nice to have a veteran kid come in who averaged 14 points a game, and he could be a solid contributor for this team. Do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that it's going to do him well not to be the do everything player on a team. I think that when he was on UNC Asheville, he kind of felt like he had to do everything. It led to a little bit of an inefficient shooting percentage, a little bit of hero ball. But now that he's going to play that, role player role for Arizona, I think he could be really good. This Arizona team is one of those teams that could legitimately go 11 deep. They've got, their starting 5 is going to be Jackson Cartwright, Trier, Alkins, Ayton, and Ristich. They have Lee, Acott Randolph, and Barcello at the, as top freshmen coming in. Dylan Smith could play a solid role. And Keanu Pinder, who I think a lot of people forget about because he's not one of those players that's going to play significant minutes. He'll probably be in that 10 to 15 minute range, but he's really efficient inside. He shoots at about 55% from inside, and he can provide, he had 3 rebounds in 12 minutes. So that's a pretty solid player for Arizona that I think a lot of people forget about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he could be a solid role player for them this year for sure. I just feel, though, this is a really big year for Sean Miller. I know that myself and you, we don't really get caught up in, he hasn't been to a Final Four, but he has the team this year to legitimately win the national championship, too. So I think there is a little bit of pressure for him to make a deep run in this tournament and at least, get to the Final Four this year. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that he's in the position now that I think Mark Few was in entering the tournament last year, which is this is a team that if they don't make the Final Four, people are going to start questioning his ability to actually get a team there. Last year, it didn't start the season for Mark Few. It kind of built up as they continued to win. But I think this year, starting out, Arizona is one of those teams that people are going to expect to make the Final Four, whether it's fair or not.
Yeah. And just real quick, do you have them at number 1 in the Pac-12 heading into the season?
I do have them at number 1. I just think that they have too much talent and they're too deep to not have it number 1.
All right. Should be a big year for Arizona. So let's move on. We're going to talk about Arizona State next. We're heading into Bobby Hurley's 3rd season. First 2 years, pretty underwhelming, won 15 games each year. Now, granted, the program wasn't in great shape when he came in, but he's done a decent job recruiting. But the roster still isn't where it needs to be, in my opinion. So I don't see that much improvement this year. I know some people are kind of high on Arizona State. I've kind of pegged them for 2018-19 to start seeing results. He's done a good job, transfers, recruits coming in. They have a few solid pieces on this team. I just don't think they're a top-tier Pac-12 team. What's your thoughts on the Sun Devils?
I have the Sun Devils kind of finishing where they finished last year, that 8th spot in the Pac-12. Their recruiting class is pretty good, but it's not one of those recruiting classes that's going to make me jump out of my seat and immediately move them up in the Pac-12. Losing Torian Graham and Obina Aleka is huge. They lose really their only good forward from last year, and their best player, their best guard. They do have a really good backcourt, but like you said, their front court is just it's a bunch of question marks for me. He has some good transfers coming in, but they're not going to be eligible until next season. So.
Yeah, and I, honestly, they were 331st in the country in defense last year. So, I mean, until you see any type of improvement on the defensive end, you can't really take them seriously as, a team that could maybe creep up the standings in the Pac-12. They're really bad on the boards. I don't think they have great depth this year. So I think they definitely still have concerns. Like you said, very, very good backcourt. Shannon Evans, really good player. Trey Holder. Cody Justice can knock down threes. Some newcomers, I think that could make an impact. I want to see if you agree with me. Romello White looks like a guy that can step in and maybe make contributions. Also, Kamani Lawrence, slasher, can score. What do you think of those two guys? Do you think those guys will step right in and maybe even start for this team?
I think Romello White right now is going to be a starter just because they don't have really that much forward depth. I think Daquan Lake, who's a JUCO transfer for them, is probably going to start. And he's going to start because, again, for the size. I mean, he's 6'10", and he's, the only one over 6'8", 6'9" for Arizona State. Kamani Lawrence, I think, could slide into the starting lineup. Right now I have him the sixth man, the first man off the bench. I think Cody Justice starts. And I think that they have to start Daquan Lake just for the size. The one I'm really looking forward to see come in is Remy Martin. He's a 4-star out of Rhode Island, top 100 recruit. And he's really that, fourth guard for them this year. Just kind of, he needs to step in when Shannon Evans or Holder have to go off just to facilitate the offense. And we'll see if he can do that.
Okay. And before we move on, is this, if they struggle again this year, which I think they will, do you think that seat could get warm for Bobby Hurley, or do you think he's still pretty comfortable in his job?
I think looking at what they have and looking at what they're going to have next year, I don't think that the seat starts getting hot unless he's not successful next year. So if he can't kind of slide or at least challenge into that top half of the Pac-12 next year, I could see that seat getting hot. But with what they have this year, I think that he's gonna be able to, stay pretty comfortable based on the promise that they have moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. As I said earlier, I pegged them for next year anyways to see, start seeing, them creep up the standings and actually see some results. Okay, and I have them at 8th. Do you have them at 8th as well?
Yeah, I have them at 8th.
Okay, all right. So Arizona's at 8th. We'll definitely keep an eye on them this year, see what happens. All right, next is California. So this might be quick. No, honestly, they lose their coach, Kwanzaa Martin, off to Mizzou. They also lose pretty much their whole rotation. Ivan Rabb, Jabari Bird, Grant Mullins. 2 guys transferred, Charlie Moore to Kansas, Cam Rooks goes to San Diego State. So this is pretty much a full rebuild for new coach Y. King Jones. They have 2 returners who average double-digit minutes. Kingsley Okaro, Don Coleman. So the Bears are pretty much in for a rough season. I'm sure you agree. No reason to look at the numbers from last year because this is pretty much a whole new team. What's your thoughts on Cal?
Yeah, I mean, I just – other than the fact that I still think that they'll have probably the best interior defense in the Pac-12 and possibly one of the best in the country, there's not much else that I see going for them this year. They do add some pretty good recruits. Jawan Harris Dyson, Justice Suing are going to come in. They're probably going to start and make an immediate impact. But beyond Okoro and Lee, I really don't see anyone on that roster that makes me go, wow. And even those two, Lee is probably going to be their best all-around player. Okoro is going to be one of those players that you just don't really want to deal with on the inside. But neither of them have ever averaged, more than, 22, 23 minutes. So we'll see, how they do with a greater, need for them to play, to be on the court.
Right. I think Marcus Lee has a huge year just by default because, there's not many options to go to. I will say this. I think one positive thing is these young guys that you mentioned, Harris Dyson, Justice Suing, they're going to play a lot of minutes. So that'll be good for the future. Let's see if Wyking Jones can recruit, continue to recruit. This year's class is okay. Getting 2 4-star guys. I think both those guys are 4-star. So I have them at the bottom of the Pac-12. I have them in 12th place. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I have them in 12th place. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm just not sure who's going to set the table for their offense, let alone who's going to score. Marcus Lee, Kingsley Okoro are they're have decent efficiency inside, so they're probably going to get some points. I'm not a huge fan of Don Coleman. I just think he's a little bit too inefficient and he doesn't shoot the ball from deep. But is it going to be Coleman? Is it going to be Darius McNeil? Like, who's going to come in and set the table for that offense? And I just don't see anyone right now that'll do that efficiently.
Right.
So yeah, I have them at the bottom of the Pac-12.
Wyking Jones he's pretty much an unknown commodity. We don't really know what type of coach he's going to be. He's had a few assistant jobs, but kind of an unknown guy. So we'll see what happens. But I just don't think Cal has enough bullets this year to even win. They might win a few Pac-12 games, but no more than that. Okay, so let's talk about Colorado real quick. To me, Colorado was one of the more disappointing teams last year. I had them in my preseason top 25. I thought they could be a top 4 team in the Pac-12. I was really high on this team, and they just never got on track. I think they started Pac-12 play like 0-7. They did come on late last season. They did make the NIT, but I just think that group underachieved big time. What's your thoughts on this year's team, and do you see any positivity with this group?
I mean, my issue with Colorado this year is I don't see. I see some really good players. I don't see any players that are going to be stars for this team. George King is probably the closest they have to one of those like leaders, take over the game kind of players. But even he's not, an elite player or a top player in the conference. And my issue with Colorado right now is, and I've gone over this, probably 50 to 60 times, who starts in the 4 and 5 spots, like who starts in the front court. You could see Deshaun Schwartz, who's a small forward, naturally kind of slide into that power forward role because they don't really have anybody to start, or no one clear right now to start.
Right. I like George King. I think he's a pretty good player. He can knock down threes. He rebounds really well. Torrey Miller is a solid role player for them. He'll probably see a little bit bigger role. Dom Collier to me is the guy. He's really had an underwhelming career. He came in as a big-time recruit for them. Just hasn't got on track, and I don't expect much again this year. Last year he was injured. So he's going to have to play really well if Colorado wants to at least, maybe stay in the middle of the pack of the Pac-12. Couple newcomers, Naaman Wright, Mizzou transfer. He'll probably make an impact for this team. What do you think about McKinley Wright, though? Is he maybe the point guard that this team's been lacking?
He could be. I think that he's definitely going to play a lot of minutes. Dom Collier could get the nod to play that point guard position, but McKinley Wright, I think, has the talent to step in and be that point guard that they need. My issue and with this team specifically is it doesn't matter who their point guard is. They need to figure out how to efficiently shoot the ball. I'm going to read off these. Dom Collier last year averaged 33% from the field. Naaman Wright, when he was with Mizzou, averaged 35%. Lucas Seward averaged 31%. Delion Brown averaged 37%. So they're not a very efficient shooting team. So right now, I don't even think it matters who the point guard is. It's who can you get the ball to and trust to make a shot. Torrey Miller is probably one of those players that they're going to lean on a lot because, he averages over 50% from the field. So It's one of those, looking at it, you're just like, okay, who can I trust getting the ball to?
Okay. And I'm just a curious question before we move on about last year's club. Were you high on Colorado last year like I was?
Going into, I thought Colorado was going to be probably that. I thought they were fourth or fifth.
Yeah.
I did. I thought they were fourth or fifth in the Pac-12. They ended up finishing sixth. I thought that they were going to go at least 500. So, yeah, I mean, I was a little bit higher on them. I think they did disappoint. But, there were, looking back, there were kind of, it was understandable to me why it turned out the way it did. But right. I think Tad Boyle's a fantastic coach. So
I do too. I think overall he's done a pretty good job there. He's got him to the NCAA a handful of times, and he's done a pretty good job recruiting as well. So I have them at 10. Where do you have them this year?
Yeah, I have them one spot higher than you. I have them at 9th, but they could. I mean, the team I have at 10th, I could definitely see jumping a few spots. So I have them at 9th. I don't think that they're good enough right now, in my opinion, or they haven't answered enough of the questions I have about them to really warrant being higher. But yeah, that 9th, 10th spot is pretty good for Colorado.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on. Oregon is up next for us. The Ducks obviously coming off a tremendous year, making it all the way to the Final Four, which I think surprised a lot of people somewhat, with the Chris Boucher going down with the torn ACL. I thought that was a devastating injury for them late last season. And then they go on a run, and I think it just shows you how good of a coach Dana Altman is. And I think, they lose pretty much their whole almost all of their production from last year. I know that Peyton Pritchard is back, but that's about it. And this team is still, I think, an NCAA tournament team. And I think that tells you how good of a recruiter Dana Altman is. He's brought in a lot of newcomers. I think it'll take some time for this team to gel because there's so many newcomers. But what's your thought on Oregon? Do you think they can still get back to the tournament this year?
I definitely think they could. And I think that, they have a coach who is going to get his players to give them, their best. I think that if there's any coach that can take a roster that Oregon has and solidly get them into the tournament, it's Dana Altman. I really like some of the additions they made in transfers they have. They have some pretty good recruits, pretty good freshmen. So, they do lose a lot. They don't quite make up for everything they've lost, but, they make up enough for me to say that right now, if I were to answer that question, I'd say that they're in the tournament come March.
Yeah. He brought in a trio of transfers that I think are really going to make a pretty big impact. I love Mikhail McIntosh, Illinois State transfer. Definitely see him having a big role with this team. Elijah Brown is a guy who, needs to work on his efficiency. Obviously, put up a lot of points at New Mexico, but it took a lot of shots to get there. So hopefully he can get him under control. And I think Paul White from Georgetown, I think he's going to make, a solid impact for this club and be a good rotation player. What do you think about those three guys, and how do you think they impact the team?
I think that all three were pretty big, additions to this team. Paul White comes in. He's probably going to be a role player. I mean, he's going to be a role player, but he's going to play a pretty significant role in that front court. They add Mikhail McIntosh, who, if he can keep his fouls down, he could be a really good player in the Pac-12. That's the only thing that I kind of look at him and say, that's an issue he has is fouls. And Elijah Brown, again, he's not going to need to be the biggest, guy, the guy who does everything. But he's going to, provide you with quite a few points, and he's going to rebound well for a guard. And I think that that's important. I think that right now you're looking at this team, who's going to get the rebounds? Because last year, rebounding was one of their biggest strengths as a team. Team defense, team rebounding was really good for Oregon. And, who's going to do that for them this year? So Mikhail McIntosh, I think, is pretty good. Elijah Brown, I think, is going to be pretty good. And then they're, obviously their freshmen are going to have to do a lot for them.
Yeah, I think MJ Cage, who comes in this year, he might have to play a pivotal role up front. And we haven't even got to Troy Brown yet. Troy Brown's a 5-star, 6'7" guard forward. He's I've heard nothing but good things about him. What do you see him doing with this club this year?
I think Troy Brown comes in. I think Troy Brown right now is an instant starter. He's a 5-star out of Las Vegas. He's probably going to be an instant starter. If there's any player that's not, in those top 3 teams that I think could win Freshman of the Year, I think it's Troy Brown. I think Troy Brown could possibly be the best player on this team. So, looking at that, I think that, he's not going to be the leader. They obviously have Brown, McIntosh, and Pritchard, but he's going to be an excellent talent at that kind of third guard forward position.
For sure. And Dana Altman, I just think he's such a good coach. He's an elite coach in my opinion. I really believe that. He's worked wonders at Oregon. He's that program is cooking right now because of him. He does a great job. I have them at 4. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to just say that they're, the second best team in the Pacific Northwest, but that's my bias talking.
I have the Ducks at 4. Where do you have them heading into this season?
I do. I have them at 4th. I think that anywhere from 3 to 5 is where they're going to finish. But I think that they right now on paper have the 4th best roster in the conference.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, up next, Oregon State. Team I'm really excited about. I know you are too. Pretty much nothing went right for this team last season. Trey Tinkle, their best player, gets hurt 6 games in, and the season pretty much went down the drain after that. I don't think many expected them to win what they win, a handful of games last season. Now this year, they're one of the more intriguing teams in the Pac-12, in my opinion. Tinkle's back healthy. They really have one of the better, top 1 through 5s in the league. I really believe that. I think Coach Tinkle can find some role players. If he can, this team could be pretty good. What do you think about the Beavers this year?
Yeah, I really like this Beavers team. I have them 6th in the Pac-12 right now. I really think that their talent, the talent they have is that good. They have some role players that, they have enough role players, even though there's some questions about a few of them, they have enough of them that, if 2 or 3 of them step up and provide good production, they're going to be in the top half of the Pac-12. And they have 2 excellent players in the front court in Trey Tinkle and Drew Eubanks.
Connor, they honestly have 4 guys, I think, in Eubanks, Tinkle, McLaughlin, and Steven Thompson. Those are legit all Pac-12 level players possibly. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that we can kind of, look at this team and they have, 4 players that could be all Pac-12. I think Ethan Thompson or Alfred Hollins, could easily make it onto the all-freshman team. And they have some other good role players. But yeah, I'm tempering my expectations on Ja'Cory McLaughlin a little bit. I don't necessarily think, based on how much talent they have, that he's going to have that, sophomore jump that a lot of people think he will. But, it's a good roster, definitely.
For sure. Eubanks, to me, is one of the more undervalued big men, in the nation. He averaged 15-8, blocked 2.5 shots a game almost last year. Really, really talented kid. Ethan Thompson, the newcomer coming in, he can pretty much do it all. He can pass, rebound, defend, score. So he's going to be a vital piece for them. But I think it comes down to Trey Tinkle because, he's been in college now he's going into his 3rd year, I believe. He hasn't been healthy. They've played 60 games since he's been on campus. He's only played in 30 of them. So he's got to prove that he can stay on the floor. Yeah,
definitely. If Trey Tinkle's on the floor, he's one of the best players in the Pac-12, easy. But health obviously is going to be an issue for this team. Can Tinkle stay healthy? Can their role players stay healthy? And stuff, and that's going to be one issue. And the other issue, I think, looking at this is, who backs up Ja'Cory McLaughlin as a point guard, and who backs up Eubanks in that kind of center-ish role.
Yeah, grad transfer from UMass, Seth Berger. He could play a small role for this team, so maybe he can give them some minutes up front.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably right now looking at it my first forward off the bench, Seth Berger from UMass.
Yeah. Right.
Really efficient inside, good rebounder. Didn't really play all that many minutes at UMass, so we'll see. Moving into a tougher conference, how he adjusts. But yeah, he can be pretty good. And Ndiaye for the senior, who also got injured last year, could be a pretty big player for them.
For sure. I have them at 6 as well. And I think it's a bit of a stretch. I'm kind of banking on all these things working out, but they have the talent, I believe, to be an NCAA tournament team and finish, at least in the top half of the league at maybe 5 or 6, if everything works out. So I think that's a pretty good spot for them. I've seen them anywhere from 6 to 10. So we'll see. I mean, they definitely, like I said, they definitely have the talent.
Yeah, and they're going to have to do well in the Pac-12 to make the NCAA tournament. Their non-conference schedule is really not anything to kind of hang your hat on. The top 3 teams they play are Wyoming, Long Beach State, and St. John's. They do play in the Advocare Invitational, so if they can beat St. John's and face a few other tougher opponents in that. But they really don't have a non-conference schedule that'll make up for a team that's lackluster in the Pac-12.
Right. That's a really good point. Always need to take a look at those non-conference schedules to see if you can build your resume. So we'll see how it goes with the Beavers. Up next tonight, we're going to talk about Stanford. Stanford's coming off a pretty mediocre year, 14-17, 6-12 in the Pac-12. I think people forget, though, it's always tough that first year with a new coach, new system. You got to gel and get used to each other. Jared Haas comes over from UAB. Hopefully this year is different. This is a team I'm pretty excited about. They return pretty much all of their impact guys. It starts with Reed Travis. Travis is really one of the more underrated guys in college basketball. Averaged 17-9 last season. He's a Pac-12 player of the year type guy. And this team has some solid pieces around him. Dorian Pickens, Michael Humphrey, Marcus Sheffield maybe can see a bigger role. What do you think about Stanford?
Yeah, I mean, they really don't lose all that much from last season. They lose Marcus Allen, but beyond that, they keep a lot of their big, a lot of their production from last season. They have a top 25 recruiting class, which I think a lot of people don't realize. Akpala, he's a top 50 guy out of Anaheim. They got Dejon Davis, who's another top 100 guy out of Seattle. So they've got some pretty good players. They've got some, 2 solid international recruits that I'm excited to watch, Oscar da Silva from Germany and Isaac White from Australia. So it'll be fun to watch. I think Michael Humphrey is one of those players that's going to need to step up in the front court. I really like him. But again, he has a lot of foul trouble. So, can he stay on the court for extended minutes? He averaged 3.5 fouls per game last year, which you can't have in a player that you're expecting a significant production from.
Yeah, 2 issues I see with this team. First is consistency. Pickens, Humphrey, Sheffield, those guys, really struggled with consistency last season, so they got to get better at that. Also, do you see point guard play maybe being a problem for them this year?
Definitely. I mean, definitely. Robert Cartwright probably plays the point. Dorian Pickens is going to handle the ball a lot for them. He's gonna handle the ball. He got 1.5 assists last year for them, but Cartwright isn't necessarily the most efficient player to have on the court, other than kind of setting the table. Dejon Davis and Isaac White could possibly play some minutes at the point guard, but that's the one question, or one of the few questions I have about them, is who plays that point guard position and who comes in for Travis and Humphrey when they need to go to the bench, and also can they win on the road? Yeah. The biggest question I have for Stanford is, can they win on the road? So
I don't think Pickens is really a point guard. Do you agree with that?
He's not. he's a shooting guard, but looking at it, he might have to handle the ball quite a bit. He's going to be their probably their second best scorer behind Reed Travis, and a lot of times Robert Cartwright might have to give the ball up. Pickens is that senior, I think, that they're going to want to have the ball in his hands a bit more.
Right. Before we move on, what did you think of the hire of Jared Haas? Did you think that was a good move for Stanford?
I think it was a decent move. Stanford's not really one of those programs that's going to entice a lot of the top guys to come. So, with what they have, I think that it was a pretty good move. And obviously, he's doing a good job. He's got a really good recruiting class. He set up a really good non-conference schedule this year. So if all comes together, they could possibly be a team that's in the tournament and a team that could win a game in the tournament.
Right. And last question for you. Talk about Reed Travis a little bit. The guy just, gets it done. He's just productive, and I don't think he gets enough attention. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think he's a guy that is going to get overlooked at going into the season. And unless Stanford does well, I think he's going to continue to be overlooked. Averages 58% from the inside, 17-9. One of those guys that I think could easily go 20-10 if they need him to. He's a contender, and one of the top 3 or 4 contenders for Pac-12 Player of the Year. He's an All-American kind of level player. It's just a matter of if people recognize him as the season moves on. And I think he'll get a lot of recognition this year because you're gonna get to see him play in a lot of big games. You're gonna get to see him play against the best talent in both the Pac-12 and the non-conference. So.
Okay, so where do you have Stanford? I have them at 5.
I have them at 5 as well. I think they could finish 4th. I think right now for me, Oregon Stanford is kind of one of those teams that could flip-flop pretty easily.
All righty. Should be a pretty exciting year for Stanford. Next on the docket tonight, UCLA. UCLA, one of the bigger, pretty much the talk of college basketball last year with Lonzo Ball. Tremendous player. They had a great year, 31 wins. They got to the Sweet 16. Club, super talented in my opinion, but a big difference. A lot of guys, TJ Leaf, Lonzo Ball are gone. Isaac Hamilton, Bryce Alford. Good news, Aaron Holiday, Thomas Schwelz are back. I think both those guys are all Pac-12 caliber guys. They have an absolutely loaded recruiting class. I think people have kind of mixed feelings on UCLA because of who they lost last year. I've seen them kind of all over the place, like I said in the poll, like 18, 20, 25, some not in, some top 25s they're not even in. What do you think about UCLA?
I'm probably going to be higher on UCLA than most people. They return Aaron Holiday, Thomas Welsh. They get Prince Ali back, who was redshirt last year, Gigi Golemon, and then they add a top 5 recruiting class. Questions I have for UCLA: how is their offense going to play out? Are they going to try and keep up the pace that they did last year, or are they going to play? They're still going to play an up-tempo offense, but how up-tempo is it going to be? They also have one of those teams that is going to get tested early, and you're going to find out what they're made of really early in the season. They play Georgia Tech, Creighton. They're either going to play Baylor or Wisconsin, UC Irvine, Michigan, Cincinnati, Kentucky. So that's a really tough schedule they have to set them up for the Pac-12. I think, and people might think I'm crazy, I think this UCLA team could win the Pac-12. They play Arizona once. It is in McHale, but if they can steal a win at Arizona and split with USC, you're talking about a team that could easily win the Pac-12. I think that people, are taking a little bit too much out of losing Lonzo Ball and TJ Leaf and Bryce Alford. But, Hans Wilkes, Cody Riley are all really solid players that could start for UCLA and make a huge difference.
Right. I mean, I think it's somewhat simple. If Wilkes, Hands, Riley, like you said, if these guys are as good as advertised, and they can make impacts, freshman impacts, they're going to be really good. I mean, they have the talent. Welsh, Holiday, really good players. So I have them at third. I have them at 3. I think that's a good spot for them. Do you have them at 3 as well?
Yeah, I have them at 3 as well. But I definitely think, Aaron Holiday, whether he or Jalen Hands starts at the point guard, both of them could play the point really well. I think, you're going to see them kind of play along the lines of what Gonzaga played last year, where you have one, probably Holiday dominates at the point, kind of handles the ball a lot, but then you have that second point guard he can go to in Jalen Hands. And Thomas Welsh, automatic from the mid-range. So pretty good defender, really good rebounder. This team I have in 3rd, but I think that their talent is really high. They could sneak into the top 15, top 10 again if it all comes together.
Absolutely. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask you 2 questions. Do you have any concerns about their depth or their front court size?
I think Thomas Welsh, is pretty big in the front court. Jalen Hill isn't as big, but he could be pretty solid. The one position I think is going to be an issue for them is the point guard position, because Jalen Hands and Aaron Holiday are probably both going to start. So, if one goes out, or both go out, who comes in, they're going to have to kind of rotate each of them out and in. I don't know how many minutes they're going to really get to play together, considering that they have no other player. Prince Ali's not a point guard, and, they have no other real point guards on their roster behind those 2.
Okay. Again, UCLA, as usual, really talented roster, and Connor thinks they can win the Pac-12, which is not too surprising. If we're picking them 3rd, why can't we, think they can win the league? So, all right, Bruins going to be pretty good. Up next, USC, Trojan Fury. Just have to say right off the bat, Andy Enfield, outstanding job so far building this program. He's built a talented roster, and he did it fairly quickly. This year's group really deep. They got 10 plus guys, I think, that could see time, maybe even more. I don't see many holes. They have size up front. They got really good point guards, in my opinion. They got to improve on defense, and if they do that, I think this is a legit Final Four team. What do you think about USC?
Definitely. Andy Enfield's one of those coaches, even when he was with Florida Gulf Coast, I really like the way that he emphasizes defense and turns it into offense. Emphasizes defense, has a free flowing offense that really works well in the transition, but can settle down into the half court if it needs to. They've got excellent talent, 4 guards that would be solid starters on almost every team in the country. D'Anthony Melton, Elijah Stewart, Jordan McLaughlin, and Derek Thornton, the Duke transfer. And then 2 players in their front court that are Player of the Year candidates in the Pac-12, Benny Boatwright and Chimezi Metu. They've got a pretty good recruiting class. Charles O'Bannon comes in, Jordan Usher out of Georgia. And yeah, I think that, this is a team that, if it all comes together, is a team that could be in the Final Four. If it doesn't, you could see them, in that 15 to 20 range. I don't think that they're, going to drop out of the top 25 because they have that much talent, but it's really all about whether it can all come together, because they're going to have to make a huge jump from the last year in order to get to where people think they're going to be.
They do. And again, I said, they need to get better on defense. They were not great on defense last year. There's just so many weapons on this team, though. I think they can, they have so many guys that can knock down perimeter shots. Boatwright was 36% last year. Jordan McLaughlin, 40%. Elijah Stewart, 38%. They got a lot of guys that can hit threes. They have size up front. They have really good point guards. Thornton, McLaughlin are both going to play big roles. I think it's actually going to be hard for Andy Enfield this year, finding minutes for everybody, right?
Right, and you're gonna look at players like Shaquan Aaron and possibly Jonah Matthews are gonna have to kind of take a back seat. Shaquan Aaron might not play more than 10 minutes a game this year. because he fell off last year and never really recovered. I think in the front court, minutes are going to be a little bit easier to come by. Behind Boatwright and Metu, you have Rakocevic and Ialunmo, who's a 4-star out of Miami. But yeah, that backcourt and the third guard kind of small forward position, they have probably the most depth of any team in the country at those positions.
Yeah, just two guys I wanted to talk about real quick with you. Number one is Chimezie Metu. What an improvement he made last season. He was legit, probably a top 5 big in the country, averaged 14 and 8. I mean, those numbers are going to rise possibly this year. And the other guy is D'Anthony Melton, who's like a super glue guy. I mean, he scores, rebounds, assists, blocks shots. Talk about Melton a little bit. Are you excited about this kid? Because I am.
I'm really excited about Melton, and I had him as one of those players that I think could start, but I really think I like Melton more as the 6th man. That glue guy that comes in and can do anything for you. So you need someone to replace Stewart. Melton can come in and do that. You need someone to replace Thornton or McLaughlin. Melton can come in and do that. He can rebound. He can score. He's really good on ball as a defender. He's probably their best defender. Behind maybe Metu, who was a pretty good interior defender, but Melton's there, that player that can come in and really do anything for Andy Enfield.
Yeah, and I think a good thing for this team is if somebody gets injured, I think they'll be okay because they have so much depth. I mean, they have so many guys they can go to. I'm really excited about this club. I have them at 2 in the Pac-12. I'm sure that's where you have them as well.
Yeah, I have them at 2nd in the Pac-12 as well.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, USC, obviously top 10 team. I like we talked about earlier, I was a little surprised they were outside the top 10, but what are you going to do? All right. Utah's up next. Okay, no, go ahead. Say what you want.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I had USC at 6th. I think that theirs is a little bit easier to explain. I think it's just that people aren't necessarily willing to jump them that high just yet.
All right. Utah next. Won 20 games last year. Took a little bit of a step back. They did finish 4th in conference. Had a solid year. NIT team. They just couldn't get over the hump. They just couldn't get those quality wins in conference. They came up short time and time again. Weak non-conference schedule, so they didn't make the NCAA tournament, as I just said. They lose Kyle Kuzma this year. Lorenzo Bonham, they've graduated. Kuzma went to the NBA. Devon Daniels is a guy that transferred that I thought could be a pretty talented kid for them, so that was disappointing. So a lot rides this year, I think, on David Collette, Cedric Bearfield, Justin Bibbins, the transfer from Long Beach State. What's your thoughts on the Utes? Yeah,
I mean, they're a team that I'm not really sure how they're going to do. They've got the talent. They could be, anywhere from, 5 or 6 to, 9. I really like Collette. He came in halfway through last year as a transfer, made an immediate impact when he got in. And they're going to have to rely on Justin Bibbins, who's a transfer this year from Long Beach State, to really play that point guard position. I like him a little bit better in the point than Bearfield. So, we'll see. And Bearfield might not start. I think he probably starts at the 2. But you could see Christian Papula, who's the one of their recruits, comes from Vegas. He could slide into the 2 just as easily. But Bearfield is a solid scorer. He's a little bit too inefficient for my taste.
Yeah, he's a little inconsistent as well. One guy I wanted to ask you about, I think that could possibly be maybe like a little bit of an X factor for this team is Jace Johnson. He's a former 4-star guy. Hasn't really put it together yet, but he seems like a talented kid. And I think he'll definitely get an opportunity this year. What do you think about Johnson?
Yeah, I think Jace Johnson could start. He's he's efficient, shoots 56, 57% from the field. And he only played 12 and a half minutes last year, but he was able to rebound like 4.5 rebounds a game. So he comes in and he's going to clean up the boards for Utah. And, he can do that. If they can win the rebound battle, they're a team that can turn that into offense and really do well on the other end. He's going to be that X factor. Is he going to come in and average? If he can come in and average 7 or 8 rebounds a game, which I think he could do, Utah's going to be a team that surprises people.
Yeah. Are you a fan of Larry Krystkowiak? Because I am. I think he's done a really, really good job with this program.
I've always said Larry Krystkowiak, for me, is one of the best coaches in the country that very few people remember. Right. He's one of those coaches. He always has a team that doesn't necessarily, they'll have 1, maybe 2 guys that people know, and he'll get them either into the tournament or close to it. Last year they finished 4th, missed the tournament, but they went 11-7 in the Pac-12, won the games that they were supposed to win. So. Right.
I have them at 7, Connor. I thought that was a good spot for them. I agree with you. I think you could put them anywhere between like 5 and 9. Where do you have them heading into?
I have them at 7th as well. Okay. I just think that for me, Oregon State has a little bit more talent than Utah, but Utah has a coach that I think is probably one of I would even say that he's possibly top 3 in the Pac-12. In terms of coaches. So,
okay. All right. So let's move on to Washington tonight. Right off the bat, they made a great move firing Lorenzo Romar. I thought it was long overdue. It just wasn't working anymore. So it's good that they can start fresh this year. They bring in Mike Hopkins, which I thought was a really good hire. I think he'll do a good job at UW. He's got some solid pieces to work with. Back, Matisse Thybulle, David Crisp. What's your thoughts on Washington?
They're a team with a lot of potential. It's just a matter of, can Hopkins come in and turn that potential into wins? They Crisp, Thybulle, Dickerson, all really solid players. They were really good last year. Kind of got overshadowed by Markelle Fultz, but really good. They do lose Fultz. They do lose Malik Dime, two pretty big players for them last year. But I think that keeping Jalen Noel, the 4-star recruit out of Seattle, was huge for them. Keeping Hamir Wright as well was pretty big. Their issue last year was defense. They were 332nd in points per game against, and 319th in defensive efficiency. So they bring in a coach who spent a couple, years as the assistant to Jim Boeheim. And Syracuse has a really good defense, almost every year. Can Mike Hopkins come in? I don't necessarily think they're going to run the same, zone defenses as Cuse, but can he come in and improve that defense? Because if he can improve that defense, you could see Washington. They're that 10th team that I was talking about that could jump up a couple of spots if they can defend the ball.
Yeah. It's kind of simple to me with Washington. I feel like, they're in a rebuild mode, but they can be competitive while they're rebuilding.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that right now their ceiling's probably 8. If they really surprise people, maybe 7, but they're not a top half Pac-12 team. They just, my issue with them is that their front court doesn't have a lot of depth. You've got Noah Dickerson, Hamir Wright might start. He might just come in as that first guy off the bench. Sam Timmons is really their only other forward that's going to be a solid player for them. Their depth is just not there for me to say that they're going to be a team that's going to be ultra competitive in the Pac-12. But they can definitely surprise people with the talent they do have.
Right. Like I said, I think, they're not going to be a great team this year, but I don't think it's going to be, a cakewalk playing them. I think they'll be competitive and give the upper tier teams, a little bit of a difficult time. So I have them at 9. You said you had them at 10.
Yeah, I have them at 10.
Yeah. Did you like the Hopkins hire before we move on?
I really did. I think they needed a coach that was going to come in, play X's and O's. And I think, Romar was really good at recruiting. He was really good at getting those guys. And when you're good at getting those guys, it shows. Their offense was always pretty serviceable. Their offense was always pretty good. But when you're not a coach that's going to play the X's and O's really well, your defense is definitely going to suffer. I think defense requires a little bit more on the coaching end than offense does, in terms of, good coaches will always have pretty solid defenses. And that just didn't happen for them. So they hire a coach from a school that's known for their defense. He was able to keep most of their recruits. They did lose their top recruit in Porter, but they're a team that's in rebuild, but they could rebuild a lot quicker than people might think that they will.
Yeah, I definitely believe in Hopkins. I think he'll do a good job there. So I have Washington at 9. Connor has them at 10. All right, we're going to finish off tonight with Washington State. Another rough year for the Cougars. 13 wins, 6-12 in league. Ernie Kent, he's 3 years at Washington State now. Pretty much no progress at all. They're 35-58 while he's been there. They've only won 14 conference games. Going into year 4, you'd like to see some type of progress, but it's just not looking good in my opinion. There's really not much to like on this roster. I mean, I like Malachi Flynn, but after that, it's just question mark city. What do you think about the Cougars?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if I were going to predict, I think that Kent might be gone after this season. They don't have any freshman recruits coming in this year. Not a single one. They had one in Roberto Giddens, and he decided to go play at a junior college. They had a few junior JUCO players, Drick Bernstein, Devontae Cooper, who could both be pretty good, Quentin Hinson. They have some redshirt freshmen.
Milan Aqua.
Yeah, him, Jamar Ergas. But, really, yeah, like you said, Malachi Flynn, I think, is going to have a breakout year because he has to. I mean, that he's going to have a breakout year by default. He's not the most efficient player, but he's really all they've got. Robert Franks is going to be okay, but beyond him, it really hurts. They lost, their top 3 scorers, and they didn't reload with anything.
No. I mean, if Cal wasn't so bad, Washington State would be my last place team. I mean, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, just there's not much to talk about. I mean, Malachi Flynn, as we both said, really talented kid. Outside of that, I really don't, see anything worth noting with this group. Ernie Kent, I don't think will be employed for much longer.
No, I think they could be worse than Cal, because while Cal does have, promise, they have Okoro and Lee and some good recruits. I mean, this team just, you look at it and you're like, okay, who's going to be a body they can put out there? They don't even need a player. They just need someone to play for them, beyond their first, 4 or 5 players. So
I have Washington State at 11. You do too, right?
Yeah, I have them at 11, but they're right on that edge where they could be 12. And I know preseason poll for the Pac-12 had them at 12, so okay. It's not surprising.
Yeah. All right, so that wraps it up for the team breakdowns tonight. We're gonna have some fun now. We'll have some picks before we finish up. So, Connor, who is your player of the year pick in the Pac-12 this year?
I'm gonna go Reed Travis. I think Reed Travis is gonna have one of those 20-10 seasons. He's gonna carry Stanford up. They're gonna finish 4th or 5th in the Pac-12. And he's going to get on a lot of All-American lists. It could be Alonzo Trier. Don't get me wrong. It could be Benny Boatwriter, Chimezi Metu. It could be Trey Tinkle. It could be someone on UCLA. But right now, if I were to pick my preseason player of the year, it's going to be Reed Travis.
Okay. Well, what I'm thinking is Alonzo Trier is my pick. I think he is flat out the best player in the conference. You could obviously make a case for Reed Travis as well. I think if Stanford, raises their game and improves like we both think they will, then Reed Travis will absolutely be in the mix. But, if they fall back and kind of are the same team they were last year, I don't think he has a great chance to win the award. So I feel more confident going with Alonzo Trier. Who's your coach of the year this year?
Andy Enfield. I think that, USC is going to be that 2. The lowest I see them going is 3. They could win the conference. Anyone in that top 3 could win. They're going to be a top 15 to 10 team, 10 to 15 team most of the year. I just like what Andy Enfield has done in his short time with USC. You could make an argument. I've seen people make an argument for Wayne Tinkle. You could definitely make that argument because he's going to take a team that was a one-win team last year, and a lot of people have him finishing close to, if not in the top half of the Pac-12. But right now, looking at it, Andy Enfield, I think, is going to win Coach of the Year.
I absolutely agree with you. I just feel like if USC meets expectations, then he'll be the guy to win the award. And my second guy would be Wayne Tinkle if Oregon State turns things around and can finish even in 5th or 6th place. It would be a huge bump for them. So I think Wayne Tinkle will definitely be in the mix. Who's your newcomer of the year? This might be an easy one, but who are you picking?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Ayton. He's just too good. He's not only the best freshman, he's one of the best players. Going to be a really big player for Arizona. So I don't think you can really – there's not really a player outside of Ayton that I think you could really argue right now is going to be a newcomer.
Yeah, I completely agree. Ayton, he's a transcendent talent possibly, number one pick type of player. So I definitely think Ayton will be that guy, and he'll make a big impact for Arizona. And another question, I think we already know your champ is Arizona, correct?
Yeah, my champ's Arizona. Depending on what happens with everything, if the whole FBI scandal gets drawn out with Sean Miller and stuff, you could see Arizona maybe slip. But, short of that, I think Arizona just has too much talent on that roster. They're going to be a team that right now I have pegged as the best team in the country. So, obviously I'm going to have them pegged as the best team in the conference.
Definitely. All right, well, Connor, that was great. I had a great time breaking down the Pac-12 with you. Again, guys, if you want to follow Connor, check him out on Twitter. Condorian FM is his handle. Also, check out his YouTube channel, Condorian FM. He also writes for Busting Brackets, a really good website that follows college hoops. And that's it for tonight's episode. We'll be back, I think, on Sunday with the Big Ten podcast preview. So thanks for listening tonight. Connor, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. It was really fun.
All right, guys, we'll see you on Sunday.